We're going to go ahead and get started with our panel this morning on industry and government careers, and we have a very distinguished panel with us today representing a great diversity of careers in this area. So I hope you have lots of questions for them. But we're going to go through and I'm going to let them introduce themselves and then tell a little bit about their career path. And I'm moderating this panel. As you know, I'm Kelly Sterner, the Education Outreach Coordinator here. And I have a little bit of experience in this area as well because I used to work at Argonne National Laboratory for about 7 years before I came here. And with that, I'm going to pass it on to Kate.
Hi, I'm Kate Evans. Thanks a lot for having me here today. And feel free to ask us anything. I guess a quick background is I majored in physics at a small college up north. And then I took off a year and a half and worked in sales, technical sales. Then went to graduate school at Georgia Tech in atmospheric science with a minor in math. I always wanted to sort of combine math with global models. And then took off 4 years and had 2 children during that time. And then I went back I went to Los Alamos as a postdoc for 2 years. Started as a staff member there, but then my husband and I had a good opportunity to come to Oak Ridge. So I've been at Oak Ridge now for about 7 years, and now I'm the group leader for their computational earth sciences group. That's climate modeling, subsurface flow modeling, things like that. But I'm sitting in the computer science and mathematics division, so we do a lot of interactions with mathematicians, computer scientists, both here and at UT. Thanks.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Helen Moore, and I work for Farsight, which is a little piece of Certara. So you see there, I've got some slides. And my trajectory for my career was that I got my PhD in pure mathematics from SUNY Stony Brook. And my PhD was in soap film mathematics. So that was a really fun and beautiful topic. But I went to Bowdoin College tenure track directly out of my PhD, got a junior sabbatical after 3 years at Bowdoin, took that to go to Stanford, not knowing anybody. I mean, I had read papers by these people who were there. It was a great place for geometric analysis, which is my interest. So I had a great year sabbatical. I was supposed to be in California for 1 year at Stanford. And Stanford had a position open up while I was there. So I applied, and I got it, and resigned my tenure track at Bowdoin to take this kind of risky, definitely temporary position at Stanford, a lecturer position. And also got an NSF at the same time. So I had 3 years doing, essentially I got my postdoc that I had wanted before I went to Bowdoin. After that, I was, actually before, I could have extended for 1 extra year at Stanford, and I got the opportunity to serve as associate director at a brand new National Science Foundation funded mathematics institute, and that was the American Institute of Mathematics in Palo Alto. So they recruited me because I had been all this time as a graduate student and post PhD working, trying to diversify some of the mathematics and science in ways of supporting women, supporting minorities. So I had done a lot of work, and that was my resume that got me into that position. When I was at AIM for 4 years, my role there was a third doing workshops, making sure workshops ran well, and all of us at the staff worked on that. A third of my job was my own research. I was very generous, so that was great for my career. And then a third of my job was identifying people we could bring to programs. So we kind of turned the model, reversed the model, and I think that really helped us get the grant from NSF. So instead of saying to the organizers, we want you to go and find more women. You don't have enough women. I mean, surely, are you telling us there are no women in your field? At which point, organizers go out and they make a good faith effort, and then they come back empty-handed usually. So instead of doing that, or they might come back with 1 or 2, we specialized in identifying people who would be appropriate for our programs. And whenever they ran a workshop, 1/4 of the slots had to be reserved for applicants. And my job was to let people know about the programs and get them in the applicant pool. And that's all we ever had to do, get people in the applicant pool. Once the organizers saw them, they said, oh, wow, oh, yeah, we want these people. So, so I went to all the AWM conferences, went to the big math meetings and identified people who were doing very good work. I'd take notes about who's doing what, who was good. I'd go to CARMS, I'd go to SACNAS, I'd go to any meeting I could find. So I had a network that we developed and a database that later was enlarged and was shared with the other institutes. But we did very well getting women and minorities. And after that, I was planning an academic career. And I'll take a little bit of my time here for that. But I had applied for academic positions. I was at a party, and a friend of mine, Susie, who had been bugging me the whole year, she was working at Genentech, and she said, "Helen, I thought you were going to send me your resume," because I was telling her about my interviews, and she said, I was like, okay. So after the party that night, I sent her my resume, and Genentech very quickly had me come in for an interview and got me an offer, and so I had 2 academic offers and Genentech at the same time, and Genentech seemed really exciting and really possibly high impact. So I went there, and it was a great decision for me. 2.5 years at Genentech, and then 5 years at Farsight, where I've been now. And actually, I'll just show my slides, if that's okay. So in terms of my advice for getting a job in industry, just a bit of general advice here, and I'll have some more specific to my field later. So just my personal opinion, like, what do I think is the best way to get a job in industry? The best way is to have one already. So how do you get around this little catch-22? Internships are a great way to get around this. And when I was at Genentech, both summers, I advertised for interns. And the first time I did that, I did it on SciAm, Life Sciences List, or SMB, or various ones. And I got 65 applicants, 3 of whom I interviewed by phone and got letters of recommendation for all of them. But I had my choice, and these were really good students. And so I got a graduate student each summer. That's what I did. And they were biomedical engineering and chemical engineering, the 2 of them. And they both have very good careers now in the industry. So internships are a great way to get a job before you have a job in industry. Low risk for the company. And here's just a list of a few companies that I know have had quantitative internships in the past. Genentech, the situation now has changed. Not as much emphasis on modeling, but you can look. But what you do is you're going to look on their web page and look under their career listings and search for the keyword math. And once you find math, then it'll be listed if it's an internship or a full-time position or all of that. Okay, so that's general. Any company you're interested in, whether it's pharma or some other. I also want to point out the website linkedin.com, which is essential for an industry job for networking purposes. So let's say that you're a graduate student and you're interested in possibly going into industry. Then you want to introduce yourself to me before we leave today, and then you want to follow up with an email to me through LinkedIn. You'll set up your own profile. And then we'll have a connection, and then all the recruiters I'm linked to can find you when they do keyword searches. So you'll have math, you'll have differential equations, you'll have the keywords they might be looking for. So LinkedIn is very important. Conferences, people have mentioned before, I completely agree, very, very important. SciAm has had a mathematics for industry meeting, and so if that's occurring, then that's a great one to go to meet people in industry. And then when you're searching online, phds.org is a website that was started by a friend of mine from high school who also got a PhD in math, and he was very disappointed that our academic preparation doesn't really give us good grounding for industrial positions. And so he was out to get lots of resources. So there are great resources on that site, from resume, how is a resume different than a curriculum vitae? How do you interview in industry? What do you wear? How does a cover letter look for industry? All of the things you might have questions about. There's a lot of resources there. And when you're looking for jobs, there are a couple of places. SciAm Jobs is a good one. PhDs.org also has jobs. And I think that's, this is my last slide. So when you're looking at the job listings, if you're looking at a company, or SciAm has listings where they're looking for somebody with a math background, they will have a list of their dream candidate skills. And they will show that in the ad, and they will not find somebody who has all of those. So when you're looking at it and you think, oh, I'm not a good match, I don't have everything they're looking for, nobody does. So apply anyway. There. I mentioned PhDs.org and LinkedIn. And I have found, let's see, I told you Susie, my friend, got me to look at Genentech, but a headhunter contacted me about my headhunter or recruiter about the current job I have, Farsight. I wasn't thinking about leaving Genentech. I was being polite to return his call. And we just talked. I said, yeah, maybe in the future, and told him my background. And he said, I have the perfect job for you. I'm sorry, I just have to tell you. Right now, I happen to have the perfect job for you. And it was a great fit. So I've been happy for 5 years there. I also met people at the Association for Women in Science. There was a local chapter in Palo Alto. And that was a great way to meet women in industry and have connections at different companies. I mentioned SIAM. And one last piece of advice that I thought that I could share. If you're interviewing at a company, so I came to this conference with a few outfits that I travel with, and that's another story I might tell in my talk later. But so I only have a few outfits with me. So I'm wearing what I would wear for work, and it's more of an East Coast outfit perhaps, because in the West Coast in biotech, people maybe don't wear a suit or black pants, but it's okay. I'm fine when I'm there too, so I can dress a little bit nicer than expected. But if you're wondering, what do I wear to an interview? Look at what people in that field are wearing to the conferences. The ones who are wearing nice things to the conferences, that's a good level. You don't want to overdress, you want to underdress. And also, that's the last slide, I don't need to show anymore. Just as a word, when you're thinking, wow, I'm a grad student, I'm supposed to get a suit for an interview. So I did that. I wasn't a graduate student when I interviewed for industry, but I bought one suit at Macy's, not too much, and I bought a pair of shoes. And so I'm wearing that pair of shoes. They've had a few repairs. It's been 8 years. But I'm also wearing that pair of pants. And then everything else I've worn at the conference is from Goodwill. And you can get some very good clothes at Goodwill. If you're a graduate student thinking, I've got to get into industry, how am I going to get the money? I don't have a job. You don't have to spend a lot on an outfit. But it is important to think carefully about how you present yourself, whether it's the notebook you're taking notes in, your pen, your outfit, just the few things that people will comment on after a candidate leaves the interview. You don't want them to be commenting on that. So, and I'll pass for now and answer questions later.
Hello, everyone. I'm Samantha Tracht, and I got my bachelor's degree in math and economics from a very small liberal arts school in Ohio. And then I actually recently got my master's degree here at UT in August. So I now currently work for IBM in the Watson Solutions Development Division, which I don't know if you're familiar with IBM, the Watson computer that competed on Jeopardy. That's the team that I work on. And if you heard in the news about mid-January, IBM created its own group around Watson. So that's about all I have. I also did 3 summer internships at Los Alamos National Lab, so I have a little bit of experience in government as well. So I recently just went through the whole job search process. It's a very lengthy one, so if you have any specific questions about job search process for government or industry, I'd be happy to answer those.
Okay, so maybe some questions from the audience, and Suzanne volunteered to run the microphone around.
I guess this question would be for Samantha. So what sort of positions did you initially try to apply for? And could you just describe what your job search looked like? How many did you apply for? Were you rejected from any? And could you just go over an overview of that process, please?
Sure.
Thank you.
So I applied to, I would have to guess, 50 jobs. I applied to a bunch of jobs. I had 5 or 6 interviews, phone interviews, I think. And I ended up with, I also applied for some government, like year-long fellowship things that were postmasters type things. And I think out of those 5 or 6 interviews, I ended up with 2 offers and then 1 offer from the government, to give you an overview of that. One key that I have found out for applying for jobs is if you go on a company's website and maybe you see 3 or 4 jobs that you want to apply for, or there's a generic, so for IBM example, you can apply just generically to IBM, or you can apply to specific jobs. Applying to that generic application is not worth your time. No one's going to see that probably. So if there's 6 positions at IBM that you want to apply for, or you think you might like, apply to all 6. You have to apply to all 6 because those 6 applications are going to different hiring managers, different technical managers, all of that sort of stuff. Also, the online applications, you have to get through an online application, and then it goes to HR, and then it goes to the technical hiring manager. So you have to get through a multi-step process. I will say all of the interviews that I actually got were because I knew someone. I did not get a single interview from just an online application. In fact, one of the offers I ended up getting, it's not the job I took, was I had applied online 3 times to this company in the last year, got rejected every time. My friend, I found out, worked there, just someone I knew from UT, more of an acquaintance. She worked there. I sent her an email. She said, yeah, sure, I'll send it to my manager. We're actually hiring. Got an interview, interviewed for on and off for a month, and I ended up with an offer. So I cannot stress enough how important networking is. One of my other interviews, guy I met on a cruise. I'm not kidding. I went on a cruise, sit down at dinner with his wife and him, got on the subject. He worked for an oil petroleum company out in Colorado. It's an international firm, huge. And he asked me about I was getting my master's in math, all that. When it came time to look for jobs, I connected with him on LinkedIn after the interview, or after the cruise, and people from the cruise kind of sent a few emails. So I emailed him and said, hey, is your company hiring? Emailed me back, said, send me your resume. I got an interview. I had applied to his company 2 times before and had never gotten an interview. So definitely use your connections, even if it's just someone you met once. It's really important. To address your question about where to look, that's tricky, and it took a lot of time to figure out. I was looking to stay kind of the computer side, so I looked smaller companies, so Booz Allen Hamilton, IBM. I looked at Boeing, Lockheed Martin, kind of your big names, I guess. There's a list I found online, and maybe I can send it to Dr. Lenhart or Kelly. It was this huge list I found somewhere of all the people that were that hired math people, and then the types of jobs. And I just randomly found it in a Google search, but I can forward it to them, and then they can put it on the website or something.
Just to follow up, at least in the labs, sometimes for postdoc positions or any job where you're fresh out of school, we've seen applicants, when they apply to many positions, they do what they're told, which is to tailor a cover letter for each position. But we often see in the computer system all the different times they've applied. So often in the research world, you want to have someone who's very passionate about that particular field. And so if they write a cover letter tailored for, I can't wait to do material science, or I am dying to do climate modeling, and it's my dream to do fusion modeling, it sort of says, okay, they're just blanketing emails. They don't really care about my particular world and area of research. So keep that in mind if you're applying to a big company. If you're sending it to multiple jobs, they may be able to see it through different computer systems. So, and I can't emphasize enough about knowing someone. That's unfortunately true. So all the more reason to network as much as possible, I think.
So you mentioned phds.org and you have your master's. What about undergrads who want to go into industry? Is there a place they should look? I'm assuming phds.org is not great if you only have a bachelor's.
Oak Ridge does hire people fresh out of undergrad, either in post-bachelor's programs, post-master's, things like that. We have some very successful ones. Yeah, Megan. Megan's doing work, your post-master's, right? Oh, there you go, post-bachelor's. And actually, I have a post-bachelor's myself who came from UT Math and is excellent, and Megan as well. So that is a way. Those are usually limited programs, but they give you work experience, build your network and work with, and also just try out a career. Do I like working in government? It's nice to take off time between going from undergrad to grad school, especially if you want to know if you want to do research. It gives you research experience. So there are opportunities like that. But I don't know if there's a postbaccalaureates.org, like phds.org. Do you guys have a comment?
In my field, most of the positions are going to people who have PhDs. When I advertised my internships, I didn't restrict it to grad students. So I got undergraduate applicants, and some were good, but they couldn't compete against the graduate students who had all this coding and all of this science and mathematics. So I had my pick of that. But so in my industry, generally they're going to look for a full-time hire. It would be you have a PhD in a quantitative field. So they're looking for the quant skills and a willingness to work in this area, which is usually demonstrated by doing some work in this area. And that might mean a postdoc that you do. If you get your PhD in mathematics, you can then try to find a postdoctoral position in a lab, somebody who needs a quant, doesn't have that experience, and is willing to train you in the biology or physiology or whatever area you're going to work in. So we do need more quants in my field, and that's one reason I go around and give talks and try to garner interest. But it's going to be an investment. You're going to learn the mathematics. I got in at an unusual time. It was a bit of a boom time in pharma and biotech, and that has changed. So they wanted just a modeler. And I'd been doing disease modeling. I switched when I was at Stanford. So I had worked with people in the medical school and got my experience. I was so lucky. My first collaborator handed me a book on immunology. And I had actually placed out of biology in college, so I hadn't seen any since high school. That was a great learning experience. So once he handed me that book and I got a student, we worked together, we read that and learned it, and he answered all our questions. So I got my education just hands-on in an academic setting. But you can do that. You can actually find people if you're doing web searches, or if you have a location you want to go to and you're looking for faculty in biology or the medical school, public health, anywhere where they're doing quant work with data that would then help you bridge and get something applicable experience.
What can you say about the nature of the work you do as far as research, or how, kind of in comparison maybe to the academic research, what you did during your PhD? Is the kind of your daily work different or the same? Pass it down.
At the National Lab, I'd say it's extremely similar. In fact, probably more similar than being in academics. It's like a postdoc or a graduate student position, but you have more clout and more seniority. But you're still doing the same things in that you're still doing cutting edge research. You have more committee work and meetings, and you do opportunities like this, so it's a little bit more broad. But I'd say, at least in the research that I do at the National Labs, it's very similar to the kinds of work you do while you're getting your PhD. But you know a little bit more about what you're doing.
My work is pretty different than the work I was doing in academia, and so I have continued my academic work on the side, so evenings and weekends, how I've been getting out papers in the last few years. The industry work is different in the sense that I'm doing mostly applications of mathematics right now. There are opportunities to introduce new mathematics. I'm going to give a talk later. I'll talk about some of that attempt. But there's a real need for some innovation in the pharma and biotech quantitative modeling community. The regulatory agency that guides the U.S. Industry is really the trendsetter. So if they say, yes, we need to do more of this kind of work, if you can convince FDA we should all be doing this kind of analysis, okay, here's a new tool, let's all use it, then that's going to be your in. But until you can get FDA to buy into that, it's a little bit more challenging. People are doing academic work, publishing papers, and trying to push the envelope on the techniques, but it is more of a side thing. You've got a molecule. You're trying to figure out if it's going to help people who have a certain kind of a cancer, and you're working mostly to figure that out. That's the main goal. But I will say that the reason I went into industry was I was writing papers in academia, one that I wrote with a student on a particular type of leukemia, chronic myelogenous leukemia. A few years later, we were looking through the literature again, and our model looked at 12 interventions you might use, and our model predicted 10 of those had no hope of ever working. And a few years later, actually some years later, people were still trying those 10 things. And they were still not working. So I felt like that's not really my avenue for impact. And I thought industry, if I went into industry and somebody was paying my salary, they would listen to me. And that's pretty much been the case. So they want that result. They want to make a decision based on the work I'm doing. So I really like that part of it. And I am trying to develop some things on the side.
Okay, so my job is not research based at all. I have a more client-facing job. So IBM does have IBM Research, which is a different business unit than what I'm in. My title is a software engineer. I don't code all day necessarily. I'm more of a data scientist. More of a data scientist. So, but my job is whatever the client wants. So one of our big clients is MD Anderson Hospital. We work with cancer doctors. So the cancer doctors tell us, this is what we want to see, and this is how we want to use it, this is the type of product we want, and then as a team, we build the models, some people write the algorithms, they get the natural language processing that goes into the computer, and then a team does the user interface. So it's not my own research. I don't get to pick what I work on. I'm still building models. There's not as much math, but it's definitely client-based, what the client wants.
This is more for Helen and Kate. How much freedom do you get in what you study? And you hear these kind of horror stories of projects just getting cut if it's not going well, or they think it's not gonna work, or something like that. So how much experience do you have of that sort of cutthroat side of it?
I'm in climate modeling. You don't think every day my whole project may get cut because some congressman decides we're not doing science. But at some point, I can't control that, so I just do what I do because I enjoy it. At the national labs, you do have some control. You can work on projects that are established. One of the biggest differences between national labs and universities is that we work on big projects with lots of people, things universities couldn't put together because they're more sort of independent operators by departments and by teams. So we can work on big projects that we can't do necessarily just with one or two people. So those are more stable than, say, you writing an NSF grant. They last usually a little bit longer, like 5 years instead of 3. You can also write your own proposals. I do a lot of that. I enjoy it. So I have a lot of freedom because I wrote and got proposals funded that are what I want to work on. So you can do some of that. It's also nice, we encourage people in my group to have a mix. So it's good to be on one project that's big, part-time, and then the other half of your time go write a proposal for internal money or something that you just really care about. And I find that's a nice mix, because if you lose your funding on your sort of short-term project, you're not going to be let go because you've got this other project and you can usually pick up more funds there. But if you really find that this other thing you're doing is taking off, you can, try and grow that project and go that direction. So you have some freedom. For people who don't like writing proposals or living in that world, it is tougher. I like it. I like a little bit of a thrill. I like the pressure of writing that proposals and doing what I want. So the nice thing about a lab is you can sort of pick your mix based on, some people just work on the big projects and every day they come into work and they work on it and that's fine. And others live on the edge, and then there's the in-between like me. So I wouldn't call it cutthroat. There's always politics in everywhere you work. But we do work with academic folks too, which is nice, because then you can sort of, like, I have a collaboration with some people here at UT. I have a faculty appointment, so if there was an opportunity to teach a class, perhaps that could work out, things like that. So.
In my situation, it's actually my dream that sometime a project I'm working on would get cut. Because too often, at Genentech, very typical pharma biotech, the quants, you would have one modeler on each team. That means each molecule you're developing. I was working on the follow-on to Herceptin. It's called Herceptin DM1. That's now been approved. I was working on some other molecules. So there were maybe 5 projects I'd be on, and everybody who's on those projects and has been on them for years, maybe, they're very attached. And they maybe don't want to see the results. They're a little bit biased when they see the results, and they just want to hold on to it because it's their baby. And that's really not what we want to do, because the goal here, the reason we're working so hard is to try to help some people who are very sick. And so if we can figure out earlier, this one's not working, and we can kill it, then that's good for the industry. It's good for people. So one of the things I talk about in our industry is that we have the incentives misaligned. You hear stories. I have heard stories at a company. There was a manager who had a milestone they had to meet by end of the year, December 31st. And what they had to do was, among a few candidates that were being developed in the laboratory, they had to decide which one was going to be pursued. And then that would get tested. FDA requires animal testing. So then we put it in mice and see what happens. And so they had to pick one of those. They didn't actually have enough data to make a good decision at that point, but it was a milestone. And I was told the person made the decision. It turned out not quite correct. So they didn't get the one that they really would have wanted if they had waited a few weeks and gotten the results of a certain experiment. So those incentives, the manager getting a bonus if they had a decision by December 31st, that's a misaligned incentive, I would say. And we need to incentivize people to kill their projects. If we know earlier, kill it right now. Move on to something else. We need the resources. I'm going to talk a bit in my talk about what are the issues. We go through the process for developing a drug. It takes 10 to 15 years. And if we could figure out sooner the drug's not going to work, that would be so good. We're experimenting in people who are sick, and we're using all those people years in terms of researchers and resources. We could put them in somewhere else. So I like to kind of, you're surfing along the projects and see which one goes forward and follow that along. It is the case that I don't really, in this industry, have so much control. I will work on what the client wants. I will try to convince them. At my consulting company now, we do quant work for all the companies. So we'll do the really hard modeling problems they can't do in-house. We'll take their overload if they have some challenging ones that are going to take a little longer, or we will try to advise them on some strategic modeling. So we do try to do a lot of persuading and convincing, and it is a bit of work in the industry as a whole. Maybe pharma, it's quite a bit of work, but other industries as well, to make a convincing case. You need to do this kind of analysis. You should let me do this. But you want to make your case. And as scientists, as mathematical scientists, we're pretty driven by proof, data, things that are convincing evidence. So I think that's a natural fit. We can be very convincing, hopefully, but people do want to see, well, what's the bottom line? What's the impact going to be? So you have to be able to show that in order to get approvals, like writing the grants. You have to convince somebody this is worth spending our resources on. Somebody else has more resources than just myself or an individual might have. And so they can give some of those resources, and then you get to work on that project if you can be convincing.
I was saying before, my job's very client-facing. However, I do know at IBM, they do encourage you to still work on your own things. If you have ideas or patent ideas, they will encourage you to do that and support you. In fact, Watson actually started out with a group of guys working together and saying, hey, we have this idea. And IBM said, okay, we'll give you a little bit of money. And as they worked on it, they gave them more and more money, and now it's a whole group. So they do encourage that.
The idea then belong to the company, or does it then, I don't know, you got some rights to it?
It depends on your contract and the company. IBM, I think they own it. I'm not positive. But I think most companies, they'll have some rights to it.
Yeah, we sign a contract when we start with a company, and it will ask for prior knowledge, prior projects, and I'm very thorough when I list all my projects I'm working on. And if I work on it in my own time and I keep separate records, I have a separate computer, that's why my bag's so heavy, then it's mine. I own it. And my contract says I'm not allowed to work on things that compete with my company while I'm at the company. But then the stuff I don't do is, I don't do things that are going to compete. And I should mention, I am thinking about some alternative ways to work on some more creative ideas that I think are going to be important. And I might collaborate with some drug companies to do that, but I'll probably step out of this role if I do that. So in order to, I've pitched a project to a client, and they were interested, they were working on multi-drug resistant antibiotics. To try to address these bacteria that are multi-drug resistant. So I had an idea, a couple of ideas based on the mathematics I had been doing about how to figure out what is it that really correlates best with the outcome. So is it the maximum concentration we get into the patient? Is it the total drug we put into the patient? Is it just the time they're above a threshold? Is it binding to receptors that we need to keep above a certain level? So there are different things that are very common among antibiotics. And but then the experiments we do to try to determine that, I had some ideas for streamlining that, and then maybe getting that experiment removed. So one less experiment, even though it's on animals, it's still big savings. And then once we find that driver of efficacy, we call it, then how do you optimize the dosing around that and combination drugs? So I've been pitching some ideas. I'm thinking about I might go to an academic type position for a while or get some funding from some other source. So I wouldn't do that in my current job because it's more of a side project. It's like something I would get an intern to do. That's when I get the chance to be creative. So that was why I really enjoyed that at Genentech. If I pitched something and got support to have an intern, then I got to put a little time in on that special project that we couldn't do normally in the drug development process.
And I'll just add on the government side, we're science in the public interest. So if I come up with an idea while working at the lab, it's the labs and they will patent it, but I can form a company and have it licensed. So I could start a company using that technology, working with the lab, obviously, because it was developed with their funds. But they encourage that, actually. There's a whole tech transfer division. They provide incentives for you. If I want to go start my own company, sometimes you can arrange for them to pay your medical care for 3 years and basically give you a leave of absence. So you can go try out your new idea. If it fails, you can go back. And they do like it when ideas that you've developed at the labs become part of the public domain. So they do encourage that to some degree.
Did you get a patent yet? Did you get a patent already at the lab? I was just curious.
No. In my area, we don't as much. I mean, climate modeling is such a large domain, I guess. We're not really building products that others would use. So,
I just want to say that I worked for Oak Ridge National Lab as a part-time researcher for 22 years, and in that whole time I was also a full-time faculty member in math. And it was a very sort of interesting challenge because I needed to have 2 lines of research, that was supported by the lab, and then because I was a full-time faculty member, I had to have NSF funding. So two totally different things because I couldn't work, on one project and they were both funding it. But I actually did get a patent for work there. It was actually involving improving cardiopulmonary resuscitation. So we got a patent there, and of course it was Oak Ridge did all the lawyer work and all that. So we got a patent there. So it was nice.
Well, I have a question then. So I was wondering if in your experience applying for jobs or hiring people, looking for people, if we talked about the cover letter already, but is an academic style CV okay for the industry, or how do you need to make it more, for a government job or an industry job, more tailored for a government or an industry position? Because I know sometimes that's called a resume. I wonder if you could comment on that.
For our area of the labs, you want a CV. It's a very similar application process like academics. We do encourage a somewhat more broad research portfolio because you'll be working in bigger teams, so that's always a benefit if you know multiple languages or just knowing how to code, not knowing just math, but applied math, things of that nature. So in our case, it's very similar to academics.
In our case, a cover letter and a resume are pretty important, and resume as opposed to a curriculum vitae. And there are some pieces of information online, but generally you want a resume where you're going to say at the top what your goal is, and then list your skills. And then maybe later you're talking about here's my experience, here's my areas of expertise that of course is coursework I've done if I've just had a graduate career so far, papers you've published, awards you've won, travel, things like that. But it is more geared toward an industrial, present your case and just very succinctly, cover letter not too long, and again succinct. But stating why you want that particular job, what skills. One of the things you're doing in those 2 pieces of application material is you're mentioning keywords. And at Genentech, they have an electronic submission process, just like many other companies, and they run it through their program, and they're seeing if you're a hit for that particular job. So do you mention pieces of software like R or S+, or SAS, or the specialized for my field, Win Non-Lin, Non-Mem, NLME, the different ones that are listed in the job listing. So when I applied to Genentech, at Stanford, when I was teaching at Stanford's an engineering university, so they have MATLAB. So I had been using MATLAB. I actually had a license for Mathematica independently, and I'd been coding in Mathematica because of that. So I had those 2, but then I decided I should learn a little bit for industry. If I'm going to do an interview in industry, I should look at some statistical software. So I taught myself a little bit of R, wrote a few programs, and that was what I could say on my resume, familiar with R. That's all I said. But it was a keyword, so it came up in the search. That was another plus, another hit for the search, because the computer algorithm's not saying, oh, how much expertise do they have in this? What are those soft words around it? They just see, is it on your resume? So you're looking to hit the words that are on the job listing, or to explain in the cover letter how your experience is relevant to that, even though you don't have those specific software packages. You've learned object-oriented coding. You've done the things that those software packages do. So pretty important. Yeah, okay. Same.
We need.
Okay, here you go. Sorry. Sorry, I'm coming. I'm sorry.
About how long a resume should be, because I'm at the point where it's too long to fit into 2 pages, but different people in interviews comment on drastically different things.
We use CVs, which are long.
I've seen some longer resumes. It's fine. It just should be appropriate to what you've been working on. If it looks like it's being padded, not good. But if yours is more than 2 pages, go ahead and submit more than 2 pages. 2 1/4 pages is fine. It's not, oh, I have to fit it on 2 pages. Same with the cover letter. It probably should be less than a page, but if you have to, just make it more than, It's electronic these days. People don't really mind.
Yeah, pretty much what she said. I have for industry been told by lots of people 2 pages, but 2 pages and a quarter, I don't think, since it's electronic, I don't think it'll matter.
I can also add to that from applying to some different jobs that you don't have to include everything on your resume. You can cut out the things, because if you have too much on your resume, things can get lost that maybe you want to emphasize. So that's another strategy.
How would you say the work-life balance compares in industry to in academia, and the flexibility of working and things like that?
From my experience, there's a bit more flexibility in the national labs than I've seen in industry, but my industry experience is limited, as is my academic. But there is some flexibility in terms of when you're at work, which is great. If you need to work from home for a given day, that's also usually fine. Now that I'm a group leader, that's less true. But my kids are older, so it's not such a big deal. But that is one of the benefits. In fact, when I took a year off before going to grad school, my husband went ahead to grad school, and he could sleep in and work late if he wanted to. And I had to show up at 8 a.m., and I thought, what the heck am I doing in a real job when I can earn half as much waking up when I want to? And that seemed like actually a benefit, just because the creative process, you'll get a good idea and you'll just keep running with it. And other days, you're just not very productive. You're just not thinking right, or there's days you go in and actually make your code worse. You add a bug. And I think I would have been better off not working today. But, the creative process means you make leaps at some days and not so much others, and you work late some days and not so much others, and everyone understands that. So as long as you get the work done, it's project-based, which I also like. After 6 months, you need to have gotten a certain amount done, but on day-to-day, which does provide a lot of flexibility with a family, with other, if you like to be a professional cyclist or whatever it is that drives you. It's a nice career in that way.
When I was working at Stanford, I joined this Association for Women in Science, and we had a volunteer program where women with PhDs in the sciences would mentor graduate student women at Stanford who were getting their PhD. And every single volunteer was from industry. I was the one academic, and I was postdoc, but so I started trying to recruit some of the faculty at Stanford. They didn't have time. That was why they were not there. And it made me think, it made me actually consider industry. I'd never considered industry before. It was really pretty driven about the academic research and teaching. But so when I went to Genentech, it was a pretty big shift. I did have plenty of time, it seemed. I had enough time. So that was 2.5 years doing that. And then when I went to Farsight, I went there because Genentech had stopped supporting the modeling so much. Times were different. The belts were getting tightened. And when my boss left from the modeling group, they split the modeling group. So I wasn't getting to do as much modeling. I said, that's fine. I can do these other things, but I'm not the best at these things. And I really like modeling. And then the headhunter had previously contacted me, and I'd gotten an offer from Farsight earlier that I thought it wasn't the time to leave Genentech, so I turned them down. But then later, half a year later, went back and said, okay, I'll go. But at Farsight, we are handling the quant work, all of the quantitative work for these companies that are submitting to the Food and Drug Administration. And they have deadlines, and they're pretty strict. And it's a struggle. You get the data, and you've got to do the analysis, and you've got to figure out, is the drug working? Do we go forward? What do we submit to FDA? And so there have been some, I've worked a lot of hours in the last 5 years on that kind of work. In fact, I moved from the group that did the data crunching and did the modeling, took the time, spent the time modeling. It can take months to get a good model working and do all of the analysis we would need to do to determine, is it working well? What else do we need to consider? So in those months, you'll have some deadlines. You'll have some milestones, and it's do or die. Although same thing would happen at Genentech. I'd be working extra hours, kind of just like pulling everything out to try to meet this deadline, and then you're told, okay, spend an extra week on it. I'm like, no, I just killed myself to meet this deadline, and I put everybody else off until after this, and you can't tell me now to break those commitments. So it's a little bit of, I moved out of the consulting group at Farsight into the training group. They needed a more experienced trainer, somebody who had more theoretical background. And now I have more control over my schedule, again, at Farsight. And I think the consulting group, the pinch there is that we don't have enough consultants. We don't have enough quants who can do that work and who are willing to do that work. So that's one thing to consider. So there's a lot of job security in the type of knowledge you might have to be able to do that work. But in the training group, we have courses scheduled, and I'm going to teach a theory course on this date, on this topic, and I'm in charge, and it's not going to get moved. So I just do whatever I can until that point, and then I've got some time off. I have a lot of flexibility right now. So I am a bit of a nomad at the moment. I gave up my apartment a few months ago, and I travel all the time. I travel for work a lot. And so now I'm traveling all the time. And I have a partner who lives in France, and I just bought a ticket a while ago. On Monday, I'm flying to France for a month. I'm going to telecommute. And so I have some flexibility there. I mean, okay, this is a bit unusual. I normally have a class scheduled in Europe. I'm trying to get one in Amsterdam, but so I work from home a lot. When I had an apartment in San Francisco, I'd go into the office once a week at most. I'd take the train. I'm offline 2 hours while I'm commuting one way, commuting the other 2 hours. I'd go over to my best friends. We'd both work, co-work at home at a table. So I had a lot of flexibility. I could go for a hike. I had my secret trail run once a week. Nobody at work knew, but I'd had a few hours blocked off, and I was just out in the woods. Nobody's there on a weekday. So lots of flexibility. I enjoy that, but I'll probably shift to something else where I have a bit more breathing time and lower salary.
So in my experience at IBM, it's a lot more flexible than what I was expecting. And the general rule is as long as you get your work done, it doesn't matter. As long as you get your deadlines. And there's deadlines. When there's deadlines, you might work more than 40 hours a week. You might work 50 or 60. And then when there's no deadlines and you just have a little bit of work, you might work 35, 30. We don't have to record our hours. I can work from home when I want. I could come to Knoxville and stay with friends and work from their apartment for a week if I wanted. It kind of varies manager to manager, but that's the general rule. If you want to come in at 9 and leave at 7, if you want to take a 2-hour lunch, go run on your lunch, go work out. It's very flexible in that sense. And dress-wise, unless you have a meeting with a client, I've seen people in sweatpants in the office.
I just add one thing about academia that's different than industry. I've always felt in academia there was never any allowance for being human and getting sick. There's nothing built into the system. You have to scramble. You have to fix it yourself. So there's no kind of backup system in place. You have to make it up. There's nothing says, oh yeah, you can take a sick day and just class doesn't meet that day. You've got to get somebody to cover it, and then you have to make it up after you come back, or you do something. And in industry, it felt very human. There are sick days, and Genentech in particular was the group I was in was pretty adamant. If you are sick, don't you dare come into the office. do not expose the rest of us to that. You go home. And they would say it's fine, don't work. At Farsight, we have a certain number of vacation days. We call it personal time off, PTO, and sick time can be in there. It's pretty generous. I get 5 weeks of vacation a year. But if I'm sick, I will make up the work later in the week because I don't want to use a vacation day. I'm going to use it for something fun and have a real vacation and real mental break. But I have that flexibility if I don't have a big deadline. And if I do, I need to, just tell people, and they'll accommodate somehow.
I have actually two questions, but it's in the same way. So from one side is the recruiters. So do the recruiters do you have a case where recruiters trust somebody coming from academia with no knowledge in like computing, things like that, but who can, I don't know, how can explain that he's able to do it if he knows what to do? I mean, if he knows what language to use, things like that. Oh, I'm sorry. That's okay. Oh, okay, that's better. So my first question was, have you experienced cases where a recruiter trusts somebody who comes from academia? But in your case, for example, you said that you came from academia, but you had already like engineering background, and you knew some software like MATLAB and so on. But do you have cases where somebody doesn't know any of this, but he knows a lot of theories behind that, and who can probably learn? Do you think it's something a recruiter in company industry can trust and be able to hire that? That's one point. And on the other side, do you think somebody who comes from academia can really fit in and be able to make it? So that was my question.
Yeah, I find that these systems which hunt your CV and your cover letter to see what you put in there and they have keywords is frustrating because, in fact, I found this after college when I graduated. They said, you have a liberal arts degree, you don't know anything. And I thought, I know everything because I know how to learn. I don't know your software, but I will learn it. If you hand me the manual and a screen prompt, I'm there, And so to me, it's more important to find someone smart who can learn. And we have been working with recruiters, and you get a lot of more diversity that way, too, because you get people from a wider variety of backgrounds and who may bring new insight into what you're doing. So I try to think outside the box as much as possible when I'm hiring, and I hope they do the same for me, and that's one reason why networking is good, because it is hard when you don't know anyone to convince them that you can learn what you don't know. Whereas if they've seen that you've had an internship at a company you recognize and they say, oh, I know what they do, I know this person can learn it. Or if you know them through some contact, you get a better impression of the fact that they'll be able to learn what you need. Does that answer your question? Yeah. Okay.
I think Kate said it very well. It is a matter of knowing somebody in order to be able to convince them. And sometimes it's just, well, maybe pharma in particular is a bit traditional in the sense that they are following the regulatory agency. So whatever the regulatory agency, the FDA, says they need to do, they will do it, and they will try to stay in the lines. Biotech's been a little bit more innovative. It hasn't been around as long, these large molecule companies, and now everybody's doing large molecules, and they're also trying to learn from what those small companies 30, 35 years ago did to become so successful. So pharma is now following that model. People are exploring a little bit more. So when there was a boom time, I think people were willing to take more risk, and now they're back to, well, let's be a little bit more traditional, and there is a bit of competition. So I think it's pretty important to be able to make your case and know somebody to be able to do that, or to go ahead and on your own learn something that's from that field. One of the things I'll do in my talk is I'll list some free software packages you can download for free. You can do everything on those for free. So that would be a route in. Even if the company's not using those, if they know you know how to use these other systems, the free ones, they'll know that you know the theory. But it is more of fitting into their world rather than getting them to realize you don't have to fit in. It's a matter of convincing them that you can fit in. And so they're looking for the quant skills and some molecular or physiological or some other kind of pharmacology knowledge so that you can speak the language.
So I actually came from my master's degree and got hired for a coding position, and I didn't know how to code. in C, they wanted C++ and Java, and I had very little experience in C++ and no experience in Java. So it can be done. I kind of knew someone, so that helped. But like they mentioned before, just having that, she said, familiar with on your CV so that the application system online will see that is enough to get you at least through that step. I think people are willing to take chances on people knowing that they can learn, because that's what my boss did with me. And actually, he offered me the job, and then I had to go online and fill out another application. Long story, but I put on the online application system that I had no experience in Java, so it automatically denied me. And I had to go back in and refill it out and put that I knew Java, even though I didn't. But yeah, yeah. So there's those online applications for you. But yeah, people are willing to take chances. You just have to kind of network and convince them.
I just wanted to say one thing. I really don't think that an academic job is quite that inflexible. I think that, you know, a lot of times people do cancel classes because they're sick or because it snowed and you can't get out of your neighborhood. I don't think it's that big a deal. At least here at the maybe at Stanford it's more stressful, but here I mean I think sometimes people cancel classes. I mean it wouldn't be good to cancel 3 or 4, but 1 or 2 I don't think it really matters if yeah. So.
Hey, this is for Kate and anyone else who does proposals to sort of design and control their own work and what they work on. What skills and qualifications do you need to identify as a source and write a successful proposal for that?
I think that you have to be passionate about your ideas. Oftentimes I would talk to people and sort of I'd get an initial idea, but think about it for a while, and you talk to people at conferences or other people, and at first they say, I don't know, but over time, it's a sales job. In fact, as I mentioned, I took a sales job right out of school, which turned out to be very good training for writing proposals. You have to convince somebody, and you have to know the right people and have talked about it. If nothing else, just so that, you know, when you talk to collaborators about your new ideas, they sometimes become your reviewers. So they think, you know, I know that she's thought about this idea for a while. You have to be an excellent writer. I can't emphasize enough the quality of writing that you have will take you anywhere you want to go. You can't spend enough time doing that well. Just getting experience, being a junior person on a team that's writing a proposal, you get to see how that's done. Networking, again, knowing senior people. So you say, I have this idea, would you collaborate with me on this? Is a great way to get someone on your team that has cred to get your foot in the door. It's important not to be, early on I wasn't a PI on some projects where it was my idea, and I was very upset by that, but then I realized that's okay. I still got to write the papers on it and do the work, and it sort of got me used to the whole process. So I'd say writing, sales skills, and just connecting with senior people is a good way to do it.
Any other questions? People trying to break in there?
No, Shelby's there. I think there's something about the key didn't lock or something.
Oh, okay. Any more questions? Well, maybe we can break just a little bit early, and in case people have individual questions, they can come up and catch our panel on the break. That'd be great. There's going to be coffee and tea downstairs and some snacks. Might not quite be ready, but it will be ready soon at 9:45. And then we'll get back together at 10 o'clock. For a speaker. But let's thank our panel. Thank you.